Hello and welcome to the Manage IQ Sprint 175 review. This was a regular 2-week sprint that ended the week of Thanksgiving in the US here. And so we postponed the sprint review from last Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, till today. As usual, I will provide the overview. Kavya will update us on the UI, Adam on the providers, and Jason on the platform and the API. So the sprint, we saw a decrease in the number of pull requests, both opened and merged. I attribute this partially to the Thanksgiving holiday. Hopefully we should be back on pace starting in sprint 176 again. And in terms of the pull request breakdown, 27 were bugs, 19 were enhancements, and 12 were refactoring, while 19 were tech debt. And with that, I will turn it over to Kavya.
Thanks, Oleg. This sprint total 18 PRs got merged across UI repos, 4 enhancements, 7 bugs, and so on. Next slide, please. Here, this is a bug we have a bug in host summary page network tree, and it's not working. So I fixed that issue here. Next one. Here, a VM stable OEM's column icon has a bug. It is showing preceding VM OS icon, so fix that issue here. Gilbert converted network routers form to Carbon. Next one. Gilbert also removed all topology pages. So currently, before this PR, topology pages are very clumsy, and in future we have planned to put topology view in each provider page. So yeah, he removed the common topology pages. Next one. Jeffrey converted search bar front end from HTML to Carbon React here. He also converted all Patternfly React data tables to Carbon React. You can see these changes in most of the tables in UI. There are still some tables that are in HTML with basic table components, so we're planning to convert them one by one in coming sprints. Next one. Here I removed left side filter section in non-explorer pages and placed all those filters in a drop-down about table and beside search. So it is just to save some space in the page. Next slide, please. So after all, last 3 PRs I mentioned, visually table pages are looking very different. So I just kept these screenshots to show the difference, overall difference. That's all from UI. Over to Adam.
Thanks, Kavya. So this sprint, we removed the obsolete live metric and live metric mixin classes modules. These used to be used by the middleware provider as a way to allow a consistent metrics API to be called when there were no metrics being stored. They went out and fetched live from the provider. But these have been deleted for a number of years, and the remaining classes were able to be deleted in the sprint. We also went through an exercise of using standard create, update, delete supports features in places where there used to be unique ones. So there are some cases where you had, off-key create when it could have just been create. So we went through and cleaned some of those up. Keenan went through and updated a number of supports features at the EMS level to delegate to their child classes. So instead of having a unique create security groups supports feature, it just goes and asks the provider's child security groups class if it supports create. This is just cutting down on the total number of supports features we have, and it also makes it easier for the providers to add new features. Before you had to add a supports not in core, a virtual attribute, and a method for the virtual attribute to be called. And so now you just have to add one line to add that new supports feature. Next slide. On the Auto SDE side, they added a refresh PR to collect host initiator groups. These are clusters of host initiators, and now they're being mapped to volume mappings. For Azure, we added a rake task to update the list of Azure regions. we had a request to add 2 UAE regions and found it was easier to just add the automation to pull them from the API. And so now if you run rake Azure regions update, it'll go out, request a list of regions from Azure, and update the regions YAML. We also fixed a bug with Azure Smart State Analysis. There were issues with the snapshot not being deleted if it failed, and also if it succeeded. Basically, the snapshot was created and always left over, and the SSA was not able to finish. So now that's been fixed. For IBM Cloud, we're catching an exception if we're unable to find VPC resource groups. These are coming from a different API and require your credentials to have a certain account type. And if they don't, then the refresh was failing as opposed to printing a useful error message. So Nasser fixed that. We also fixed a missing subclass of availability zones. So all the AZs that were being collected by VPC provider were of the base type. They didn't have a subclass, and this was causing issues in some other PRs that we were trying to do. Next slide. For HMC, the Power team has added collection of NICs, LANs, and switches to the HMC provider, which is nice. And Kubernetes, we deleted Hawkular metrics in this sprint. So the last version of OpenShift that supports Hawkular metrics will be end of life around the time that this release is going out. And even in that version, you can already use Prometheus as a metrics backend. And so we've deleted all the old Hawkular metrics code, as well as the dependency on the Hawkular metrics gem, which is nice. And that's it for providers. Over to Jason.
Sorry, couldn't find the mute button. Can you go back a slide, please? There we go. On the platform side, Adam added a method to get the metrics in a particular range. This is to as the backend component for a new API to fetch the real-time metrics. Similarly, Joe added a method called timeline options to expose event stream options to the API. There's when I get to the API section, I'll show it, but he also had a change that needed a backend method to collect the information. Brandon added a change to enable SSL on the API and UI pods when certificates exist. This goes toward his efforts to secure the connections between pods. I think just with this change, just about everything is done except Kafka. So that's up next. And finally, I added a method to the ManageIQ loggers class to set class level and instance level filters for log hashes. This will allow us to set password filters early and once, so that other calls to log hashes will automatically use those filters instead of having to call it everywhere and hoping we don't forget one. Adam fixed a bug with supports attribute without a call name. This turned into some UI issues. And so when a call name is not specified, supports attribute will default one. And Joe also fixed an issue with the class attribute default in a couple classes. This was causing UI issues in some of the policy simulation screens. Next slide, please. As Adam said, there was a lot of refactoring that went on in the supports feature area, including those first two. I also made a change to rename supported subclasses to permitted subclasses. The supported subclasses was having a terminology clash with the supports feature. They're technically slightly different things. So we renamed it to permitted to remove that ambiguity. And then this past sprint, we had a lot of technical debt cleanup. You heard Kavya talk a little bit about some of the topology removals. Keenan removed cockpit support. This was a cockpit proxy feature that was added that we never really worked very well. And I don't think it was used very much at all. So that was removed. As Adam said, he removed the live metric and live metric mixins. He also removed the V2V infrastructure domain from the automate repository, the automate content. I finished up the removal of Postgres admin. We had moved that into the appliance console some time ago. And this was just finishing out the cleanup of that. And finally, I added the removal of the usage of VMDB logger. We have a separate ManageIQ loggers gem, and there were some places where we were using this legacy class. So finally got that all cleaned up, and we're now completely using the ManageIQ loggers gem. And then on the build side, I removed the overt release repo. This was dependent on a few other deletions, including the V2V. Overt release was giving us a lot of problems because it had old RPMs in there. And so when the build would resolve, it would sometimes pull old RPMs, including ones that have security issues. So this gets us, this is more of a security change, but it's also a technical debt cleanup. Next slide, please. We also had a lot of documentation additions. Brandon changed the codified database restore, cleaned it up, made it simpler. So that documentation was updated. He also added documentation for his new SSL TLS between pods changes, including also there's a script in case you need to generate certificates in order to do that. And finally, Adam added some documentation for adding additional regions to AWS and Azure. This was sort of a side effect of him adding the UAE regions. And we've always had the ability to add additional regions on the fly, but it was never documented. So hopefully this will help some people out. Next slide, please. On the API side, we had two enhancements. One was Adam added the API metrics endpoint. So if you do a get on API metrics, give it a resource type and a date range, it will return the actual metrics themselves. If you expand the resources, it will have the actual metric content in there. Next slide, please. And Joe added the options call on the event streams. This will bring back the list of timeline events broken down by class and then broken down by group names and group levels. This is all to help drive the UI change for the timelines so that they can populate the dropdowns via the API. And I believe that's it.
Very good. Thank you very much. Well, that brings Sprint 175 review to a close. Next Sprint review is next week, next Wednesday on December the 8th. Same time, same place. And with that, I want to thank all the speakers here today, all the contributors, and the entire ManageIQ community for making Sprint 175 happen. See you next time. Thanks a lot.